which is the Unit 1 meaning of livelihoods, Unit 2 true livelihoods, Unit 3 livelihoods landscapes. And in the next class, let's look into Block 2. The topic of livelihoods is extremely important because it helps us understand how people survive, manage resources, face difficulties, and continue their lives in the society. So, usually, when people hear the word livelihood, they think only about jobs, salary, income, or businesses. But the topic livelihood is much broader than that. Livelihood includes every activity, relationship, resource, uh, even opportunities and decisions that help a family survive and maintain life with dignity. So we can see, for example, an old woman in a family receives an old age pension, and she also takes care of the kitchen garden. And for example, a man who works as an agricultural laborer and sometimes migrates to other places searching for work. And in another example, let's say the woman also works as a laborer and collects firewood from nearby forests. And the children help the family by fetching water, you know, protecting crops from birds and animals. So at first glance, these activities may appear like very ordinary, which people are basically doing for the survival. But together, they create the livelihood system of the household. So the livelihood is not only about earning money. Some activities may directly generate income, but they reduce expenditure and support survival. For example, if a family grows vegetables in kitchen garden, they save money because they do not need to buy vegetables from the market. So similarly, collecting firewood from forest, it also reduces the fuel expenses. Also, the eggs produced by the hens, they provide nutrition and also reduce household expenditure on the food. Therefore, livelihoods include both direct income and indirect support systems. So, livelihood is not only about earning money. Some activities may not directly generate income, but they reduce expenditure and support survival. So, this diversification helps families reduce risk because if one source fails, another source may support them temporarily. So, and another important idea which was discussed in this unit is that poor people depend on multiple livelihoods. So, a single family may depend on agriculture, wage labor, migration, livestock, pensions, kitchen gardens, social support, and forest produce all at the same time. This diversification helps families reduce risk because if one source fails, another source may support them temporarily. Now let's look into the characteristics of livelihoods. So there are four important characteristics of livelihoods. These are income, expenditure, employment, and risk. So these four characteristics are sometimes called the four arrows because every household tries to move them in a positive direction. So families try to increase income, reduce unnecessary expenditure, increase employment opportunities, and reduce risks in life. Income may also come from wages, farming, fish, carpentry, livestock, migration, pensions, business activities, and many other sources. So, income may not always be regular, but some families receive income only during harvest seasons, while others receive daily wages. So, in some rural areas, people also receive grains, vegetables, or services instead of money. Therefore, income can exist in different forms and at different times. So, expenditure is another major characteristic of livelihoods. So, every household must spend money on food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, education, transport, and social ceremonies and livelihood investments. So, poor families often spend a major part of their income on survival needs alone. Medical emergencies especially create severe financial pressure on vulnerable households. Many poor families borrow money during illness and become trapped in debt. Expenditure is another major characteristic of livelihood. So, even medical emergencies especially create severe financial pressure, and many poor families have to borrow money during illness and they become trapped in debt. And the third characteristic we have is employment. Employment means spending time and energy to generate income or obtain goods for self consumption. Employment opportunities differ greatly between people and regions. Some people get regular employment throughout the year while others suffer from seasonal unemployment. So agricultural laborers, especially, they face uncertainty because employment depends on rainfall, seasons, and the farming cycles. Employment means spending time and energy to generate income or obtain goods for self-consumption. So employment opportunities differ greatly between people and region. So some people get regular employment throughout the year, while others suffer from seasonal unemployment. Agricultural laborers, especially, they face uncertainty because employment depends on rainfall, seasons, and farming cycles. And risk, and the fourth characteristic we have is the risk. Risk is one of the most serious challenges in livelihoods. A poor family may lose income due to illness, accidents, floods, droughts, crop failure, and market changes. Because poor households, they usually lack savings, insurance, and security. Even one crisis can create long-term suffering. So this is why poor people are considered highly vulnerable. Risk is one of the most serious challenges in the livelihoods. This unit also further explains that livelihoods are extremely complex. So no single person can completely understand every aspect of livelihoods because livelihoods are connected with economy, society, environment, politics, technology, and culture. Farmers may understand cultivation practices but not the market prices. And scientists may understand technology but they do not understand the village realities. Therefore, development workers should integrate knowledge from communities, experts, and institutions. Now let's look into the important livelihood principles. So poor people are both producers and consumers. They produce crops, labor, and services, but they also consume food, healthcare, and household goods. So poor people also face multiple risks simultaneously. Therefore, intervention should not focus only on income generation, but also on reducing vulnerability and strengthening support systems. So, another important principle is that local best practices already exist within communities. So, some farmers or artisans may already be using better methods successfully. Development workers should identify these successful practices and help other people learn from them. This approach becomes more effective because people trust examples already existing within their own communities. This unit also explains how globalization and technology are changing livelihoods rapidly. Earlier, villages were more self sufficient and localized. But today, markets are becoming distant and economies are highly interconnected. So, the new technologies continuously replace old skills. Therefore, people must continuously learn and adapt to survive in modern economies. So, this is all about Unit 1. Now, let's look into Unit 2, which is True Livelihoods. So, this unit, True Livelihoods, uh, explains about, the tribal, rural, urban, and emerging livelihoods. So, these categories help us understand how people in different geographical and social conditions survive. So, each type of livelihood depends on environment, resources, culture, economy, technology, and opportunities available in that region. So, for centuries, tribal communities depended on forests for survival. These tribal livelihoods are deeply connected with forests and natural resources. So these forests provide food, fuel. It even provides with wood, medicinal herbs, hunting resources, fishing opportunities, and non-timber forest products. So the forest resources were not only economic assets, but also part of tribal culture, identity, and traditions. So these tribal livelihoods are deeply connected with forests and natural resources. Many tribal communities practice agriculture and animal husbandry along with the forest based livelihoods. So, the goats, pigs, poultry, and cattle they form important livelihood assets. Some tribal groups practice shifting cultivation while others practice settled farming. However, lack of land ownership and poor access to resources continue to create problems. Many tribal communities practice agriculture and animal husbandry along with forest based livelihoods. This unit also explains us how tribal livelihoods are under great serious threat today. So the deforestation, industrialization, mining, large development projects, urbanization, and restrictive government policies, how they have weakened traditional livelihood systems. And many tribal people have lost access to forests and ancestral land. As a result, they are often forced into migration and wage labor. So, the mining projects and industrial activities in tribal regions create another serious problem. Tribals often become laborers in their own lands, while outsiders control industries and the profits. Also, displacements due to dams, industries, and urban expansion also pushed many tribal families into poverty and insecurity. Mining projects and industrial activities in tribal regions create another serious problem. Tribals often become laborers in their own lands. Rural livelihoods mainly depend on agriculture and allied activities. So, the farmers, agricultural laborers, livestock rearers, artisans, fishermen, and small traders form the backbone of rural economies. Agriculture continues to support millions of households directly and indirectly. Rural livelihoods mainly depend on agriculture and allied activities. This unit also explains that the rural livelihoods are facing deep crisis. So the farmers are struggling with rising costs of seeds, rising costs of fertilizers, pesticides, irrigation, and labor. At the same time, market prices for agriculture produce is also, often unstable. So the environmental changes such as droughts, floods, and crop diseases also create additional losses. Many farmers borrow money from cultivation, but they fail to recover investments after harvest. This creates debt traps and financial insecurity. The agricultural crisis in India has become so severe that farmer suicides increased in several regions during the last few decades. Many farmers borrow money for cultivation but fail to recover investments after harvest. So this creates debt traps and financial insecurity. Traditional rural occupations have also weakened because of globalization and changing consumer lifestyles. So the potters, weavers, carpenters, blacksmiths, cobblers, barbers, washermen, and other artisans earlier played central roles in village economies. But the factory-made products, which are being made now, and the modern service systems, they have reduced the demand for traditional occupations. So the traditional rural occupations have always weakened because of globalization and changing consumer lifestyles. Now let's look into the urban and emerging livelihoods. So the urban livelihoods are mostly connected with service sectors and manufacturing sectors. So the urban people work in construction, transportation, hotels, hospitals, schools, retail shops, domestic work, entertainment, delivery services, and many other occupations. So the cities provide large employment opportunities, but also create competition and inequality. So the construction work is one of the largest employment sectors in urban areas. So these migrant workers from villages, they work as, masons, painters, plumbers, electricians, and laborers. However, many workers, they face long working hours, low wages, they receive low wages. They work in unsafe conditions, and they also lack insurance or, any kind of social protection. Also, the mobile phones, internet services, online shopping, app-based transport services, even management, media industries, and digital platforms created entirely new livelihood opportunities. So mobile phones especially transformed livelihoods in India. So the farmers, electricians, drivers, vendors, plumbers, and domestic workers, they are now using mobile phones to communicate with customers and access the market information. Technology reduces time travel. Sorry. Technology reduces, time which is taken to, travel for long hours. And it also improves connectivity and increases efficiency. Also, online shopping companies such as, like we have Amazon and Flipkart, they have created employment opportunities in storage, delivery, packaging, and customer service. Media and entertainment industries also expanded rapidly, providing opportunities for anchors, editors, designers, camera operators, and technicians. So, despite all these opportunities, technological change also creates challenges. People require continuous skill development to survive in this rapidly changing economy. And the poor people often struggle because they lack, access to education, they lack training, they lack financial resources which are needed for, emerging livelihoods. So despite these opportunities, technological change also creates challenges. So this is all about unit 2. Now let's look into unit 3. So the third unit discusses the changing livelihoods landscape in India. So over the last few decades, India has experienced major economic reforms, globalization, industrialization, urbanization, and a lot of technological revolutions. These changes transformed both rural and urban livelihoods in a significant ways. So, agriculture was once considered as the backbone of Indian economy. So, most rural households depended directly or either, indirectly on farming activities. However, over time, the farm sector began facing multiple problems. Like they started seeing low productivity, they had water scarcity, and also, the cultivation costs were actually rising. Also, the soil fertility was reducing, and also the unstable market prices. So, the Green Revolution initially increased agricultural production and food security. But later, many farmers became dependent on, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and costly seeds. So, environmental degradation and rising input costs reduced the sustainability of farming systems. So, as agriculture became less profitable, many rural people started migrating to towns and cities searching for better opportunities. So, migration became a major survival strategy for poor households. Young people, especially, they move towards construction work, transport work, factories, or working in hotels and working in service industries. So, the development programs in India focused on improving infrastructure and social capital. The roads, schools, hospitals, irrigation systems, self help groups, and cooperatives were established to improve livelihoods and reduce poverty. Development programs in India focused on improving infrastructure and social capital. So the farm sector still remains extremely important because millions of people depend on farming, dairying, fisheries, and livestock activities. Livestock especially acts as an important support system during agricultural crisis. Milk production, poultry, goat rearing, and fisheries provide additional income and opportunities. So this unit also, explains that livelihoods inside villages are interconnected. So if agriculture declines, many other occupations also suffer. For example, the transport workers, local traders, even blacksmiths, and agricultural laborers, they all depend on farming activities. So therefore, livelihood should always be understood as systems rather than isolated occupations. The non-farm sector has become increasingly important because agriculture alone cannot support growing populations. So the construction work, tailoring, handicrafts, transport, petty trade, repair work, and wage labor, they also provide additional employment opportunities in rural and urban areas. So the non-farm sector has become increasingly important because agriculture alone cannot support growing populations. So women also play an important role in livelihoods. So the women participate in agriculture, livestock care, even in wage labor, household management, self-help groups, and small businesses. So despite this contribution of women, women's work often remains undervalued and underpaid. Women play an extremely important role in livelihoods. So the organized employment provides stable salaries, legal protections, pensions, insurance, and other benefits. Whereas unorganized employment includes informal work without job security or social protection. So most poor people in India work in the unorganized sector. So this unit also explains organized and unorganized employment. So the organized employment provides stable salaries, legal protections, pension, insurance, and other benefits. The unorganized employment includes informal work, without any kind of job security or social protection. Most people in India work in the unorganized sector. Entrepreneurship and enterprises are important for livelihood improvements. So the small business and local enterprises can create employment opportunities and improve local economies. However, entrepreneurs require training, market access, infrastructure, credit facilities, and policy support. Also, the government interventions such as self-help groups, employment guarantee schemes, rural development programs, and skill training initiatives attempt to improve livelihoods and reduce poverty. These programs aim to strengthen income opportunities and empower vulnerable communities. The livelihoods landscapes in India continues to change rapidly because of globalization, technology, climate change, and economic reforms. So, therefore, the development strategies must focus on sustainability, inclusion, skill development, environmental protection, and equal opportunities for all communities. So, the livelihoods landscape in India continues to change rapidly. So, livelihoods are much more than jobs or income generation. The livelihoods include all activities, resources, relationships, and opportunities that help people survive and live with dignity. So, the subject of rural livelihoods management, it explains how people survive, how they earn income, manage resources, and maintain their lives with dignity. A livelihood is not limited to jobs, salaries, or businesses. It includes all activities, resources, relationships, skills, and opportunities that help individuals and families sustain themselves. So, the livelihoods are connected with economic, social, cultural, environmental, and political conditions. They also involve both direct income generating activities and indirect support systems that reduce household expenses and improve the survival skill. So, in the first unit, we saw that it explains the meaning and nature of livelihoods. It describes the example of, poor family living near a shrub forest, and every member of the family contributes in different ways to maintain household. So, all the various activities which we have discussed in Unit 1, individually these tasks may seem small, but together they create the livelihood system of the family. And we have also discussed the four major characteristics in Unit 1, which is income, expenditure, employment, and the risk. And we have also looked into the livelihood principles and changes in Unit 1. And in Unit 2, which is true livelihoods, in which I've told that true TRUE means the tribal, rural, urban, and emerging livelihoods, and how different regions have different livelihood systems, and how these livelihoods depend on geography, resources, and opportunities. And we have also looked into the tribal and rural livelihoods and urban and emerging livelihoods in separate. And in Unit 3, which is about livelihoods landscape, in which we have learned that economic reforms changed livelihoods in India, and agriculture is also declining in many regions, and that migration to urban areas is increasing rapidly. Also, technology and globalization transform livelihood systems, and also that infrastructure and social capital are important for development, and how livelihood systems are linked with the economic growth, and how environmental changes affect the livelihood significantly. So we have looked all of this in unit 3. We have also looked into separately about the farm sectors, non-farm sectors, and the role of women, and the employment. So in the next class, let's look into Unit 4, which is poverty and marginalization. And then we have Unit 5, vulnerability and gender. And Unit 6, livelihoods framework. And Unit 7, livelihoods assessment tools. So today we have discussed 3 units, and in the next class, let's discuss the remaining 4 units and finish this rural livelihoods management. So thank you everyone.